I actually know the comic book that I read, that the first comic book that made me love comic books. In England, there was black and white reprints of Marvel comics. It was actually weird because they were black and white reprints of Marvel comics, but the front cover and back cover was the 1960s Batman newspaper Sunday strip, so that didn't make sense. But as a result, when I was a little boy, I was reading stuff that was ever so slightly before it had really come out in America. So it was Bollywood Daredevils, and especially the Matador, which I just read it, and I loved the fact, even then I noticed, and I thought it was Bollywood that did this, and I got the Daredevil archives, and it was actually, who is it, Bob Brown, or it was a comic. And then the one that made me want to be in comics, you know what, I think it was probably Frank Miller's Daredevil. I don't know why, Daredevil again. When I was in England, I went to film school, and I don't know how much it sort of helped me in terms of my career in Hollywood that came later, but you do this thing called semiotics. You guys do semiotics here? And isn't it the most boring subject ever, apart from Umberto Eco, who's cool. Everyone else is just pretentious, and they will use 10 words to describe something, and one word will do it. It drove me crazy. But the one thing that got into my head was the idea of different kinds of storytelling for different mediums. So, and also I was learning how to storyboard and all of that. So, at the time I first wanted to get into comic books, there wasn't, Scott McCloud's book wasn't out, and all the stuff now that you can read that helps you understand the language of storytelling. Back then, there really was just like how to draw comics the Marvel way, which is, crap, really. And Will Eisner's books, but really, to be fair, to be honest about those books, they're sort of Will Eisner's list of tricks that he does. But for someone coming in, it's not really instructive about like getting into comics and understanding, transitional panels from left to right and turn the page and how many word points you can put in a panel and all this sort of thing. So I really had to teach myself, and it was this boring class semiotics that I think helped me understand what was singular about it. And why I bring up Frank Miller is he really, at that time, now he's a nutcase, but back then he was so, his art was so perfect in terms of like panel by panel. He obviously had studied Eisner, he studied Gil Kane. You could see the list of his influences. We're all of us are a list of influences, aren't we, obviously. But he just had nailed it. It just inspired me to try and do it myself. And this was also when Alan Moore was starting comics. And his scripts were legendary, describing everything, describing the dust in the corner over there and all this sort of thing. So I thought you had to describe it a lot, and I've learned how to pass down my descriptions, but like having to describe the camera angle and the shape of the panel and everything are things that you can only do in a comic book. So long story short, it would be Frank Miller.
So I mean, you are a writer. You're talking about a lot of visual influences as well, but you are a writer. So wondering what kind of scripting format do you use? Does it change according to the collaborators that you're working with, according to the editors or publishers that you're working with? And do you think there will ever be a scripting format for comics that is standardized, like it is for movies and playwriting, or is it always going to be something that's kind of individualistic?
Well, let me do the second question first. I wish there was a formula, but there isn't. And I'm just now co-writing this Painted Spider-Man graphic novel with Mark Waid, and I look at his scripts, and their format is so different from mine. And I sort of assumed that everyone's was kind of the same. What happened with me was, the first thing I did, well, I wrote this book, London's Dark. It was a British graphic novel, and then I got work doing Grendel Tales, which at that time was published by Comico, who went out of business. But Dinah Schutz, who's a fantastic editor, literally sent me a letter describing like her day as if it was a comic book, just so that she could describing herself and the format and everything else, and little things like it doesn't really matter which you choose to do. You can either do lowercase panel descriptions and then your dialogue is uppercase or vice versa. But artists want it different, so they can pick out the dialogue. So all this sort of just logical stuff, but that was the format that she showed me, and I've always had that format ever since. So I wish there was a universal format, but I don't know if it will be. What was the other question?
Does your format change according to the collaborators that you're working with?
Well,
or how you write for different artists?
Well, some artists will request a plot, and I really hate doing plot, because for every great artist that does great work with plot, it's also a very easy way for certain artists to be lazy and try and do 3 panels when really you need 5 to tell the story effectively, or they're too preoccupied with resale value of the pages, and they don't want to spend any time with Clark Kent and a nice big poster of Superman to sell. And there's a nuance that can often get lost where a character perhaps stops for a second and takes a pause, or he stops. He needs to think what he's going to say next, and often you lose that if you do plot style. Having said that, though, it amazes me that I don't know why suddenly it works on Frank Miller all the time. I didn't pretend that, but what's it called? Man Without Fear with John Reed Jr., which is fantastically paced. That is plot, which I can't believe. It looks like it's fully scripted.
So, when you say plot, you're talking about the Marvel method?
The Marvel method.
Okay.
So, do people know the difference? Okay. So the difference is that the way I work, the way most people work, is you describe the panel and then you have the dialogue below it. And how detailed you want to be is up to you. So you can have, you can be very, I've seen scripts for Chuck Dixon, very brief. It's all up to the artist to really do everything. Or you can lay out the pages. Archie Goodwin used to do a little sketch where he literally lay out the panels. So that's what a lot of writers do, and it retains control. And this is the thing, is it's not that I want my ideas pushed down the throat of the artist, but I would rather have too many ideas than not enough. And I would hate to not mention an idea and then him not have an idea and the page is weak as a result. So that is the main method. But in the 60s, Stan Lee was writing every comic book at Marvel. And he had brilliant artists. He had Jack Kirby, he had Don Heck, who's very underrated, Steve Ditko, who else? Those guys, Gene Colan. So he was able to give them plots and then go back in later and do the dialogue. And it was a very quick way for him to work, so he could do all these books. But it became the Marvel way, and often it's fine. But then, for people that know comic books, back in the days prior, that led to Image with Rob Liefeld and all of that, it led to some crappy comic books because they had freedom to basically do bad work.
Do they still mostly use the Marvel method at Marvel?
I'm not sure really. I mean, Mark Waid doesn't. I don't think Fraction does. I'm not sure. I think some people do. Scott Lobdell, of course, he does. So, and it's a way to work very quickly, but I find it lazy and unfulfilling.
Yeah. You've done stuff that set in different time periods and locations. What's the most research you've ever had to do for a given script? Do you like doing research?
I love doing research, but I love doing research. But I love it more now than I used to. When I was doing The Shade and the historical aspects of Starman and Witchcraft, which I did many years ago, and it took a huge amount of research. There were days when you just had to go to the library, and that was your day. You'd go to the library, you had to find books, you had to order books, wait for them to come in, all this kind of stuff. Now with the internet, you can find everything you want in minutes, which is wonderful. So I love history, and I'm trying to think of anything planned historical. Not really, but I'm sure I will.
Yeah.
And I guess the last thing was The Shade, the 12-issue series I did.
Is there a usual place for you to start with a story? Maybe if someone hands you, for example, a Superman book and says, okay, you're going to write a Superman book, do you tend to start with, okay, trying to get your head around the Superman character, or a setting that Superman hasn't been in before, or kind of conflict he hasn't dealt with before? Do you tend to start with one?
There is literally no concrete way to describe that. Sometimes you get the idea for a fight scene, sometimes you get an idea for an emotional moment, sometimes you get, just a vista that comes in your head. It's always different every time. I remember with Starman, the one thing I knew I wanted was that I knew eventually I was going to kill Ted Knight. So at the very beginning. And that Jack Knight would never say I love you to his father until he got to say it when he comes back to the spirit. And I knew that was going to be their whole big arc. So sometimes it's that kind of thing that kind of you have in mind and you keep working towards.
Is your process writing process particularly different when you're approaching film, or I know you're working on a novel, a prose novel as well?
Yes.
Very different media. How does that change your writing process?
Honestly, it doesn't really. I've always written this way with a film script and a comic book script. You have to understand that I've been writing so long that I can look at how much dialogue I've written and work out that's about a page's worth of dialogue. So I always write the dialogue on paper, and I always write like a play, because I think there's an organic flow to how people talk and everything else that if you do it, panel description and then dialogue, panel description, dialogue, you lose that. It becomes way too staccato. So so I've always done that. And when I've done films, films really are the dialogue, and then you put in, the panel description, George Clooney runs down the corridor or whatnot. But it's really the dialogue that is the compelling thing in the film. So it's really the same. And then even, with the novel I'm doing, I really can't say too much about it because I kind of want it to be a surprise what I'm trying to do with it. But there are two characters and their banter is very important. So even that I write as like a play, so that you get the cadence and you get the pauses and the nuances.
Do you tend to, when you're trying to come up with dialogues, you kind of put yourself into the head of the characters and kind of method act it to a certain extent, where you're going back and forth with the dialogue, or how do you approach dialogue?
Really. Some of it, after a while, it just becomes organic. It just all reflex. Sometimes I do get to the character, and some people, online, and I read what people say about my work, and I try and put those pauses and stops and things like that. I'm really trying to I didn't used to do it when I was younger, but I'm really trying to sort of change how I do dialogue, and then immediately you go online and it's like James Robinson's dialogue is crap. So you can't win, but I'm trying to. I do try and get the different personalities and also the different pauses and things that people do. I hope it comes across.
Right. You want to have some kind of distinctive, voice for each character. So you've written a lot of stuff, and oftentimes at once. What's the maximum number of series you've been writing at one time? And then how do you go back and forth in your head and in your process? Are you working the same thing, different comics on the same day, or do you?
No. Well, I've never done that. Often when you finish a comic, even if it's a continued story, you need a break. So going on to another project is quite welcome, can be quite welcome. Especially if it's different, it isn't just the same. I imagine writing Spider-Man and then having to write what's his name, the spin-off of the plot. It's kind of the same thing. So it would if you write Spider-Man and the next thing you write is Shade the Changing Man or something. It's so different that it's a nice change. But what's the most I've written? There was one point early in my career when I wrote for about 2 months I wrote 5 books a month, and that's way too much. Most writers, professional writers, can do a book a week, although I'm actually trying to improve the quality of my work. And I tell you what inspires me is like Scorsese. And I know it's pompous of me to sort of compare myself to Scorsese, but he's a genius, but he's never happy with his work. And I think the moment you're happy with your work, you'd be dead. You're creatively dead. So I'm looking at my dialogue. I'm looking at how other people write, like Fraction and Bendis and Grant Morrison. And I don't want to write like them, but I'm constantly trying to hone it and improve it. So to do that, it requires slowing down. So I'm writing about 3 books well, when I have the work, I write about 3 books a month.
Okay. Do you consume a lot of other media in general? I mean, to get ideas and to hear different voices?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I mean, I don't know. It's those things. It's why, ironically, or I hate that. Everyone uses ironic. Irony is a word in the wrong. It isn't ironic at all. What I was about to say. But you know, obviously, I read books. I read, you know, the newspaper, etc. But I'm really inspired by video games.
Yeah.
There is a kinetic quality to them that I just love, and like, I'm sure some of you guys have played Assassin's Creed. When, what's his name, Enzio, the Italian, at the end of the third of those games, when I knew I wasn't going to see that guy anymore, also what I loved about it was when he was young, he was like leaping around, and if you look at that last game, every time he lands, there's this, like he's this old guy, and it's like, oh, if I have to jump through a building one more time, it's going to seem really good. But at the end of it, when he got his sexy, you know, middle-aged librarian love, and I knew that I wasn't going to see him again, I got a lump in my throat. And you know, video games, I think are kind of the future in some ways.
Would you want to write for video games?
I would love to write video games. I don't know how to get into it.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because I've had a sort of vague interest in it, but the game that got me into it was Eisner Award, which I loved. I don't know if anyone else played it, but I loved it. And I've basically caught up. I'm very lucky because there's so many great games I haven't played. So I was able to catch up on everything, and I've played, you know, a lot of games.
We've been on. I've had you on panels before about diversity in comics, and you had mentioned that in Starman, I think it was perhaps the first kind of gay kiss in a mainstream American comic book. And certainly you also got publicity for doing the Alan Scott character as a gay man in Earth 2. But you know, just in kind of in general about diversity, do you think of including kind of diverse characters as just good storytelling? Do you think of it as a political something to do progressively political in the world? How do you approach that in your head?
Well, quite honestly, I grew up in London, and I grew up in Kilburn, Willesden, Cricklewood. It's northwest London. It's very Irish and very Jamaican, and there's lots of, you know, Indians and Pakistanis too. And really, there was no racial prejudice. You know, I can't recall as a kid ever hearing anyone use the N-word. And we were all just hanging out, and we hang out together, and you know, it was very, very integrated. And so with the comics, you know, it isn't a political state for me. And then, you know, being a little straight boy, you know, the last thing was I didn't really have any gay friends or know any gay people, and I went to art college, and I wanted to, you know, honestly, as a young guy, I wanted to hook up with the hot girls in the fashion class. So I would be like, hey, you know, whatever your name is, do you want to go out for lunch? And she was like, yeah, if Sandy could come, and Sandy would be, hi, I'm Sandy, and gay guy. And you know, by the end of the lunch, I was like, wow, Sandy's fucking cool, you know. So it's only, you know, like all prejudice, it's all just not knowing. So, and then, you know, obviously you get to, like, you know, the music scene in London, clubs and everything else. There's a lot of gay culture. So very quickly, that the last sort of, I don't want to say prejudice, but the last ignorance gets thrown away, and you just, you know, go on with your life. So when I write these characters, it isn't this strategy to get attention or to put forward a political point of view, although I'm very touched by the fact that what I've done has affected people and they've responded to it. But it's never that calculated. It was just, it felt natural to make characters this or that, you know. I want to say one other thing though. Just because it kind of irked me, there's this website, Bleeding Cool, and the guy that runs it is a bit of a, excuse my language, a bit of a cunt. And I was like, did I do the first gay kiss in mainstream comic? So of course he had to find, there was a gay kiss in Enigma by Peter Miller before. Yeah. But I don't regard that as a mainstream comic. That was Vertigo, and it isn't like normal comics.
And it's been out of print for...
But he had to like dig it up and find it. So in terms of that, perhaps it is the first one. It was the first one.
Okay. We're going to hear first. Okay. So you were talking about growing up in England and going into the London music scene and all this. Obviously, I'm assuming you're British. Your accent kind of gives you away. I don't know, it's a French accent. I don't know. All right, so,
I was born in Manchester, but my mother was Cockney, and when I was a kid, when I was a little baby, really, we moved to London, and I grew up in London.
All right. So do you? There are a lot of British writers in American comics for some reason, specifically writers. I mean, you, Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore, Peter Milligan. I mean, there's just a lot of. Is there any reason for that? Do you feel like British comics industry or culture or whatever kind of translates well over here?
I think at one point British writers brought a certain something to American comics that American writers didn't, and it all starts with Alan Moore. I mean, he really did kind of change, I think, everyone's perception of comic book writing. And at the same time, we grew up with 2000 AD, which, with this kind of hard-boiled fascist era, it was political. Basically, the whole Judge Dredd is political satire if you see it, and all these other interesting sort of other stories in 2000 AD. That was really what we grew up. And there was also these very serious British books done by D.C. Thompson, a Scottish publisher, which we also were, Dark Edis is hugely inspired by them. So there was all of that. So I think maybe we brought that to American comics. And whereas at that time, I think American writers were kind of like borrowing from the last American writer. They weren't bringing anything from outside of comics. I think that's changed now. I see some fantastic, obviously there's Brian Azzarello, there's Charles Soule, Fraction, Brubaker, they're all American, So that has gone away, I think. And I don't know that I'm impressed with every British writer I read now. I think that time is gone. I think, honestly, I was one of the last ones to sneak in.
Right. Yeah, there was a kind of preciousness maybe about superheroes and that kind of material by the American writers at the time that the British writers helped kind of break through.
Yes, but also, like, there was this sense of, like, with the British guys were like, let's fuck up American comics.
Yeah.
And often, my problem with that was not that it was, if it's good, it's good, but when it's just like, let's make this guy a deep, I remember, this was right after, when he was doing Black Orchid. When he was doing Black Orchid, Neil Gaiman pitched me, and Neil Gaiman's brilliant, so let's just get that out of the way. But when he was starting out, he pitched me his next thing. He wanted to do Boy Commandos, and it was like this old man dragging these kids into battle, and it was this depraved thing with elements of like child perviness and whatnot. And luckily that didn't happen, and he ended up doing Sam instead. But I was like, really, that's it. And there's another writer, I won't say his name, but he writes for 2000 AD. He's still working in England, and he's like, I've got this idea for Ragman. I'm going to make him a transvestite. And I was like, oh, okay, well, what happens? What's the story? He's like, I've got sorry, I'm just going to make a transvestite. That was all he had. So it's like, and that's the one thing at the time, even today, I sometimes don't like about British writers, is they just want to fuck up characters for the sake of it.
Did you ever work for 2000 AD, or did you ever want to work with any of those kind of iconic characters? And is the British industry kind of big enough to support a lot of professional writers, I guess, and make a living there?
Well, yeah, I don't know if any of you read 2000 AD, but there's definitely writers that work solely for them. I actually, when I got into film school, I got a job at Fleetway, and I was the assistant editor on Crisis, which was a Fleetway spin-off book. And the guy in charge at the time was this guy Richard Burton, who was this just grotesque guy, and he didn't like me. And I tried. Oh, you know what? I lied. The first job I got, I worked at Time Books, and I was the editor there. And because I was always trying to get art from him, because I needed the art, he was always so mean. We had this antagonizing relationship. And then when I tried to get work into the D, he said, "I'm just never going to hire you. I don't like you, and I just don't want you over to work at 2000 AD." And then fate took me to America, and I did Grendel Tales and worked for DC and what have you. And I never got the chance. I would love to write for Tuesday's idea, but I mean, I think maybe that ship has sailed.
Yeah. So you've done you did Leave It to Chance, which is a really wonderful kind of all ages comic.
Yes.
What was your process with working with all ages material as opposed to the kind of standard, more kind of adult comics? Did you approach that differently? You worked with Paul Smith on that idea.
Yes, and again, honestly, some of these things, when you've just been writing for a while, you can just do them instinctively. So I just, if you're writing for all ages, I don't know that I even really did it for all ages. I just kind of made it light and fresh, tried to.
Yeah.
And I think when you do stuff for all ages, you can underestimate the intelligence of the young reader, and the books feel a bit shallow, a bit bland. So I remember, I mean, looking back at those first versions of Leave It to Chance, I don't know if you have read them. I was like, wow, this is kind of a complicated storyline. It was sort of a bit borrowed from Dashiell Hammett. I was like, really? Should I be doing this? But everyone liked it, so you should never. And look at the Harry Potter books. I mean, they're incredibly complicated and incredibly. There's certainly a lot of depth of character and plot. So I didn't really try and write for young people. I just tried to write a good story, but knew that. Also, the character Chance Falcon just writes herself, and it just makes the stories light and fresh and fun.
Right. You've obviously done a lot of work for corporate-owned projects and characters as well as creator-owned, and I'm wondering about the difference on how you kind of approach that material. With the corporate-owned stuff, obviously, there's a sense of a big sandbox, right? So you're part of a group of writers that have worked with these characters. You have kind of responsibility to the other writers, to the other creators.
Well, in a perfect world, often that isn't how it works out. There are different people with egos, and it could just be a hard struggle. But in a perfect world, yeah, everyone's working together and they're trying to make a cohesive universe. With creator-owned stuff, I mean, it's just, is this a good idea? Is it a story that? Because also, I mean, I'm sure, I don't know. No offense, but I don't know if you guys are artists or writers or what your field of interest is. But as I'm sure you've all experienced in terms of picking up a paintbrush or writing down a story, sometimes you get that great idea in your head, but it isn't enough that you want to sit down and actually write it. It's sort of this passing whimsy that you get. So with creator-owned stuff, if you want to write it, you should write it. I saw Bluebeard up there, which was me. What was it? It was all the adult, the porno comics that were coming out. I don't know if you remember, there was a period of time when Fantagraphics had this Eros line of comics, and one of them was actually written and drawn by Bill Willingham, and it was pretty well done, but the rest of it was just crap, and it was just like porn. It wasn't interesting, So I said to myself, I'm going to do a thriller with like sex and very explicit, but there's going to be themes and a plot and characters and an arc and all of that. So, and that was something where I started it, and it was like, yeah, I want to tell this story. So that's really it.
In terms of the superhero stuff, I remember talking to Phil Jimenez about this, and he said that there was, in his mind, there were kind of two different kinds of superheroes. Ones that are similar to us and that we can kind of relate to more empathically, so like a Spider-Man, for example.
Yes.
And then there are the ones who are more kind of archetypal and represent our aspirations, more like a Superman or a Wonder Woman. How do you feel about that kind of distinction between characters?
I think it's true, and I think that you need to decide. I mean, for instance, you said Superman. I'm not sure if that's true, because someone, I forget who it was. It's an artist I'm sure you guys have never heard of, but he said something. I completely agree with him. The difference between Superman and Batman is that Batman, because he's fucked up, his parents are dead and whatnot. He is Batman and he pretends to be Bruce Wayne, whereas Clark Kent is Superman. Superman is a Kansas farm boy. To me, it's like perfect American, all of you at some point came, unless you're Native American, you came from somewhere. You know, he is the perfect example of the American dream in that regard. And you know, he's just a good Kansas American that has to dress up and be this hero. And that's the difference. So I actually would put him in with Peter Parker more than I would these archetypes. And I know it's harder. I think when you can grab that element of the real person within Superman, I mean Jeff Johns has done it very well. You really can find something. Otherwise, he's just this boring superpowered cipher that flies around. By the way, I was worried because I wouldn't have anything to say. I guess I have a lot to say, but at the same time, I hope I'm answering these questions. I feel like I'm just going off.
No, it's lovely. Thank you. So you work primarily at DC Comics, but you've worked for all different kinds of companies over the course of your career. Do you feel like are there different significant differences culturally and artistically between the different companies and how they approach their materials, or is it really more up to your interaction with your artist and your editor?
Yes, there is definitely a difference. There's a difference with how companies. I mean, I don't know if any of you sort of follow my work, but I quit DC recently. And there's definitely a difference, and I've started doing stuff at Marvel, which will at some point be announced. And there's definitely a difference in how those two companies operate in terms of communication, in terms of artistic freedoms, where you have to toe the line and everything else. Some of the other companies like Dark Horse and well, really, what other companies are there that aren't just independent publishers? There's Dark Horse and I guess Valiant now is publishing it. Well, I haven't worked for them. But Dark Horse is very much, every book feels very different, so that is the example of the comic and the editor and you. I don't really know what to say. I mean, they're very different. I've just started, I've done some stuff for Marvel in the past, but I've just started working with them again. It's actually quite a nice experience. But it is different from DC.
Okay. Are there specific characters you still really want to write or in the field, or you feel like you're going to be moving more over to create your own stuff?
Well, I've definitely got a lot of creator own stuff in the pipeline and Image, and there's something at Dynamite that's going to be announced very soon. But I love superheroes. So now I'm sort of moving into the Marvel stuff. I am realizing there are Marvel characters that I've always wanted to write. It's weird because the only thing that has been announced is me and Mark Wade doing this painted Spider-Man graphic novel. He very kindly invited me to join him in this project. So, but when I got I've been writing it, like writing the first piece of Peter Parker, like, you know how when he fights villains, he says, like, you know, goofy jokes and stuff. Writing my first Spider-Man joke while he's fighting the villain, I was like, wow, I've just written a Spider-Man joke, you know. And then seeing the first painted page, which came yesterday actually, it's like, wow, it's the first page of Spider-Man I've ever written, you know. So there are still characters I like. They tend to be goofy characters. At Marvel, it's like the Black Knight and the original Human Torch and, you know, Quicksilver. I've always loved Quicksilver because he's such an arrogant fucker, you know. Yeah. But that's interesting. That's much more interesting than some boring hero that has no personality. So they're the characters I like to write, the odd ones. Although I did write Captain America. I've written him twice actually, and I'd like to do something more with him in the future.
Can you pinpoint why superheroes in particular have drawn your imagination for so long?
I honestly no. I mean, I think that you just get bitten by that bug, and you can't, you know. I remember, I shouldn't really be dropping these names of creators. This creator that's very well known works for David King. Okay. So he was on a panel with Matt Wagner, and he's like, you know, and he's a nice enough guy, and he's obviously, you know, he's very talented. But he's like, Batman's a silly little character, you know. And I was like, really? You know, he's not a pop culture archetype that will outlive anything you or I will probably ever do. You know, you sure he's a silly little character? So he clearly, you know, and David King loves the comic book medium, but I guess he was never bitten by that bug. If you're bitten by the bug, you just, you know, you love it. And it's an odd it really is an odd medium because, you know, it's so epic and it's so, and at times Shakespearean, at times it's sort of like a soap opera, and you know, I've tried to give up comics. You know, when I was like first like date girls, you know, I was like, well, I can't be buying comics to date girls, but I couldn't help myself. You know, I would keep the comics. So that is, you know, I mean, it's unrambling, but yeah, if you get that bug and you like superheroes, it's really hard to. And I love, you know, Love and Rockets and what's his name, Optic Nerve and all that stuff too. I'm totally myopically into superheroes, but I do enjoy that kind of weird, wild abandon of reading them and writing when they're good.
Yeah. So just about the kind of industry and how it functions to be a writer, a professional writer in the industry. How do you get paid? Do you get paid for per page, per story? How do royalties work as a writer?
Well, I think we're all still trying to work out how royalties work, but you get paid by the page, and as the more successful you are, obviously, the more you get paid. There are some pretty big names, a couple of big names that are paid pretty amazing money by the book, but I can only think of like 2 or 3 that get that deal. Most people are paid by the page I am, and you do the comic. You've already sent in like 10 invoices and signed them, so they have them in a drawer. They put one into the paper, but then a week later you get them.
And royalties, how does that work?
Well, royalties come every month for the comic books, and then every quarter you get royalties for the trade paperbacks and everything else. So it's interesting. Like sometimes you get a royalty for like 25 bucks, you know. And then sometimes when you just had a graphic novel come out, it's like, you know, a few grand, and you're like, oh wow.
Is there a specific percentage that writers get as opposed to artists, or how does that work?
I should know this. I don't know. It just it checks out. I don't know. Do the writers get more? I think the writer and the penciler get the same royalty. Maybe I don't know. I can't be definite.
But the royalties possible for every kind of book that you put out, essentially.
Well, I mean, it's possible. Can you hear me, by the way, at the back?
Yeah.
The gentleman back there, can you hear me? No? Yeah, great. Can you hear me? Because we're doing this with the mic, and if everyone can hear us,
we just can't record it without the mic. That's
yeah, that's right.
Sorry.
So what were we saying?
So royalties always for the mainstream companies, there's always going to be
well, no, there's a cutoff. It's like 40,000 copies. So more than 40,000 copies, and then you get royalties. And of course, you know, in today's market, not many books sell more than 40,000 copies. So there are, you know, half the Marvel books and half the DC books the writers like the royalties, but they get paid to write. So it's, you know, it's better than, you know, working in a sewage plant or something.
That's the right attitude. Yeah, I was just researching stuff for the Golden Age and looking at Crime Does Not Pay, which was selling 2.7 million copies.
Yes.
That's how in 1948.
Yes.
You also worked in Hollywood.
Yes.
For several years. So, how do you feel about the Hollywood, kind of general question, but how do you feel about Hollywood as an industry town, or as an industry as opposed to the comics industry, and kind of rewards and frustrations?
Well, that's not true. I was going to be like all glib and say really the reward in Hollywood is money, but if you get a gig, and there's a million people that will clamber over your back to get the same gig, you know, it's very, very cutthroat. When you get the job and you write that first script, it's kind of you doing pure writing. The moment all these producers with their opinions, or people that feel because they're paid to have an opinion, they have to have one, get involved and they start tearing it apart, moving it around and everything else. And then you have to go back and, you know, you do a draft and then a set of revisions. Sometimes you do 2 sets of revisions. That set of revisions where you're sometimes changing things, that you don't really believe should be changed. It's so like soul destroying, and honestly, that's why I got out of it again. I mean, I'm going to get back into films. I directed a film, and which it was just a little $1 million movie, but it was so much fun to do. So I am thinking about that sort of thing, but I would rather make less money in comics and have a degree of autonomy and control over what I do than work in this medium. I mean, if I wrote this League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which is a truly terrible film, I know that. But it was originally a great script. I believe in the script I originally wrote, and it just, with 9/11, that impacted the whole plot, and it all got changed and rewritten. By that point, Connery was involved, so then it was basically the producers telling what to write, and it became a big mess. But, actually, where I was going with that. Hang on, wait a minute, let me, I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, but don't editors and publishers in the comics industry also tell you to revise things?
Well, I don't want to say too much, but it's sort of that kind of bullshit is why I left DC. So, but in the past, the way it is if you have an accord with your editor and you have an accord with your artist, what you write and what you imagine will be on the page pretty close. And that is, and then it's at 3 months. You can write a script, and with all the stuff that goes on, you can be 4 years with a script before it comes out. There's the immediacy of writing it, the speed of it comes out. It's just exciting and fun. So that's something. I mean, like Paul Smith once said to me that he did comic books because he could make a lot more money in storyboards, but there was something for him about seeing his name in the credits and seeing his artwork. Whereas when you do storyboards, you're a blip as the list of all the storyboards that go down the screen. So, that's definitely something about comic books that I like is the immediacy and also the connection that you can have with your own work. Films, the other thing that happens in Hollywood obviously is you end up reading lots of unproduced screenplays, and the idea that he's like fantastic. And no one will ever see them, is kind of heartbreaking sometimes, And the other thing is like when they bring in someone else to rewrite you. If you're a sculptor and you do a statue of Johnston here, and someone says, you know what, we don't like how you've done his shoulders. We're going to bring in another guy who's great on shoulders. That statue, even if it doesn't go up in the square, wherever it goes, it exists somewhere. I guess the screenplays do, but they exist in a cellar somewhere in the studio's basements.
Yeah. And you'll never see them.
And you never see them. And I've read some wonderful scripts, and I'm lucky. Some people they'll never be seen.
All right, so this is my last question, and we're going to open it up for everybody here. What are the works you're most proud of?
What was I most proud of? Well, I guess the Golden Age, and obviously Starman. Thank you. I tell you the thing I'm most proud of with Starman is that I had this whole big story and I wanted to finish it, but when Archie Goodwin died, he was my editor, and I was going through some personal stuff too. When I sent Jack Knight into space, I almost just stopped it there and let the reader, write the next adventure of Jack Knight. And at the last minute, I was like, I can't do that. I have to see it through. So I'm very proud of myself for that. What else am I proud of? Vigilante. City Lights, Perry Justice. That's something that just getting the artwork out of Tony Salmons, who is a scoundrel. I'm proud of it. Just for that alone, I'm proud of it. But I'm actually proud of the story, and that was so much fun to research. Bugsy Siegel back before the movie and everything else, finding those bits of data about him, so I would say that too.
Cool. All right, so we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So if anyone has any questions for Mr. James Robinson, please raise your hand.
Hello, sir. You?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say the afterthoughts on Starman, the collection, I thought those are some of the most honest writing on writing that I've read. And I was wondering, when you worked on Shade, coming back to Starman after X number of years, how did you get back into that world, and what was that like going back into the world that you'd inhabited maybe 10 or 15 years before?
Well, it was Jeff Johns was doing this whole Blackest Night thing, and he was the one that asked me would I do a Starman. And I'm never going to write Jack Knight. Well, me and Tony talk about doing this, the Untold Adventure. There's one little moment where we could tell a flashback adventure that occurs, but I'll probably never do Jack Knight. You never go back. It would be a disaster. I know it would. But I had this idea for this one issue, Blackest Night, and writing the Shade, he's just like a comfortable shoe for me. I could just write him and. The way those sort of dark quips he does and everything else. And it was so much fun to write him again, and I felt such a relief that I'd actually done, I felt quite a good comic book. And Dan DiDio came to me and said, would I do a monthly Shade book? And I was like, you can't do a monthly Shade book, it would be too much. He's best in small amounts. But I said, but I'll do 12 issues. So I did that. I think all of the work I've done since I've come back, I mean, there are issues here and there, but I think a lot of the work I've done since I've come back has been flawed. And some of it is my fault, and some of it is editorial or other circumstances, But the fact is, I look at the body of work I've done, and since coming back to comics, and I'm not as proud of it as I could be, or should be. But that's generally something I'm proud of, the 12 issues. You said.
Can you talk about resurrecting characters when you resurrected Starman and both other superheroes? I wonder about where the decision come from. I'm sure you asked this a lot, but how did you come to choose this character to resurrect or to
Well, it was quite calculated on my part actually. Firstly, I kind of had this thing in my mind. I wanted to do a superhero. A book that felt like the Tom Waits album. So that was always my intention. And but I looked around and Daredevil with Frank Miller was bi-monthly, it was about to be cancelled when he took it over. Swamp Thing was about to be cancelled. Doom Patrol was about to be cancelled. And I realized these books that people have a negative, it's maybe different now, but then if you had enough passion and you came onto a book where there was a negative perception, you could make your name quite quickly. So at the time, I had this whole and the one thing I realized immediately about the problem with Starman is there were all these different Starmen, and there was no sense of lineage where there is with Green Lantern and the Atom and all these other DC characters. So I was like, I'm going to create a lineage, and I'm going to make Will Payne into try and make him a cool character. And then they killed him off, which freed me up to do Jack Knight. And it was going to be a book. They kind of tied it into Zero Hour, but it was always going to be its own book. And Mike Collin was a bit wary because it was, not what you expect. And at the time, each editor had to sign off on. There were 3 group editors at DC. There was Mike Collin, Archie Goodwin, and Denny O'Neil. They would sign off on each other's work. And he said, I just want, a mini-series, which is why at the end of the first arc, there are those pages where you see Will Payne, and so I was like, please let me keep going. But by the point, I'd done about 3 issues, and Colin was looking at the work, and he's like, fuck it, let's just keep it going. So what was the question, sorry?
No, I was just thinking about, the idea, I feel like Neil Gaiman did something really similar with Sandman, the idea of resurrecting and changing the trajectory of a superhero, and I thought that was just, I think it was a great comic.
I will say, I'm not really that good at Tootman and Hall, but I do love those Golden Age characters, and I think that loving Ted Knight made it easy to write Jack Knight because he loved Ted Knight. So I think that was definitely something in my favour. Any other question? Yes. Yeah, you just give us.
Well, I have 2 questions.
Oh.
The first question, do you have any thoughts about self-publishing comic books if they're not traditional superhero material? Should you attempt to find a publisher, or should you go down the road of self-publishing?
Well, let me think about this one. I think it really depends on the material. And I think that if, you know, I mean, there are, you know, independent comics, there are queer comics, there are, you know, feminist comics. There are publishers that want that kind of material. So maybe when you have the umbrella of a publisher, obviously they take a cut of your money and everything else, but they also take care of a lot of stuff that if you self-publish, it can really drag you down, you know? And what is the difference between a self-published book and like a mini comic? Really, there's only a little bit of difference. Whereas a book published by a publisher it just gives it more credence, and also things like getting into diamond catalogs and last gasp catalogs and stuff like that. If you self-publish, it's really, really hard. Whereas, you know, if you can get into that Drawn and Quarterly or Slave Labor or some of these sort of more independent publishers, they already have that inroad into diamond, so it's easy for your work to get to the masses, which is really what I would imagine everybody wants, is to get their work to the masses.
A diamond, by the way, is the comic book publishing distribution monopoly, essentially. So,
Yeah, it is a monopoly.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question okay?
Yes, it did, thank you. And my second question,
Okay.
in terms of dialogue, Matt has made comments about, you know, writing dialogue that have just been amazing, and dialogue is a real weakness for me, I think, because of, you know, I don't have as a deaf person, I don't have the opportunity to overhear pacing and timing in people's conversations. So what's the best way to learn dialogue? By reading books or reading comics, or what would be a good way to learn how to improve my writing of dialogue?
Well, yeah, let me think about this one. I mean, it's a very interesting problem, but I don't have the problem you have, so I have to imagine it. Obviously, like you read a book, there's great dialogue. I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. I don't know what to say.
I'll definitely be reading Starman.
but you know, I mean, you can read. I mean, well, for instance, if you read Shakespeare, if you read the banter between what's his name, Beatrice and Benedict in Much Ado About Nothing, you have to put your own pauses and structure on their dialogue, and you don't need to be able to speak to read that and work it out. So, yeah, read. I honestly I don't want to say read. I suppose, and then you know.
All right, I'll work on that.
Yes. Yes.
I was just wondering how you deal with like criticism or anything like that, especially nowadays when you can like Google your name and everyone has an opinion.
No, you just have to deal with it. It's you know, at first it's kind of hurtful and you get upset, but after a while you just get used to it. Like everybody, and also I did this book, this DC book, Crime and Justice, and it just went awry, and it was hated by everybody, and I was going to hate everybody. So I would go online and it's like Robinson sucks and Robinson's hack and blah blah blah. And at first it was like really distressing to me, but then after a while you just, you know, it's just an opinion, you know. I mean, what I find interesting is the role of the critic, you know, like Siskel and Ebert, whoever. They had, you know, some esteem to their opinion, it mattered their opinion, but now everyone has an opinion, they can put it out there. So it's interesting that critics really aren't as important as they used to be. But, you know, you just have to suck it up when people say you're crap, you know. Miss you,
I'm interested in, you're talking about creator-owned projects, and you had a couple maybe in the future coming along. How long does a creator-owned project simmer in the back of your mind? Is there an average before you get to maybe writing and then actually pitching it to a publisher?
Honestly, any idea, sometimes it takes years, and sometimes it just comes fully formed. And so there really isn't ever, in classes where they teach things, where they try and formalize creativity. I'm always a bit worried about that because I don't believe there is a formula to creativity. And then with pitching, I mean, you know, there are tricks to it. I mean, if I was you and I had an idea, I would try and get somebody to do like 5 pages of it, so that, or you know, all of it if you can, but 5 pages of it, so that a publisher will look at it, an editor, you know, whatever, even an independent publisher, and go, this person can tell a story, they understand pacing, they understand all this stuff. When you present them with a document of some sort with this idea, they just don't have time to read it. You know, if you go to someone at a convention, even you know, over in wherever that is, over down the road, I guarantee you, if you hand them an outline, it'll be in the hotel trash can. It won't even get into your suitcase, you know, on the plane. Just there's so much stuff to read. But if they see something, they can see that you're a storyteller. I mean, that isn't really answering your question, but you know.
That helps.
But there isn't really a formula to how long it takes for an idea to percolate. You know, sometimes it's very quick, and sometimes it can take forever, or take a very long time.
Maybe I should ask which of your books took the longest and which took the least amount of time before it was out there.
Well, I mean, lots of them I've done very quickly. I don't really want to say because it makes me seem like a hack, which I really hate, because I might not be the best writer, but a hack is somebody who doesn't care, and I do care. But what has taken me? You know what? Well, the Golden Age was as much my inexperience. It took quite a long time. You know what? This is a very annoying answer, but I'm doing a new book for Marvel. I can't say much about it, but there are certain books at Marvel at the moment that I just like Hawkeye and Daredevil, that are these interesting little gems in the midst of everything. And I really want to try and put my little stamp. So I'm taking so long to try and make it as the best I can make it. So that would be it, I guess, the longest one.
It's Archie Kills the Punisher.
You jump to the back there.
It's been forever since I've read these, so forgive me if I'm off. The bits you wrote at the end of each issue of Starman, where you would go into detail on something that seemed to interest you that month, whether it was Viewmasters or Fiestaware or whatever.
Yes.
Is this, what do you personally collect? What interested you to go into these fun, obscure things?
Well, I mean, collecting is fun. I realized, I'm going to throw a whole thing with this. It's one thing to collect something, but I was like collecting, I mean, you know, I'm pretty candid about everything. I was in a very unhappy marriage. So I was collecting as a way of not dealing with that. So I was collecting too much. So it's one, you know, I mean, like the Viewmasters, like that started with, there's this woman called Florence Thomas. She was a Christian in Portland, and her love was doing these beautiful carved pews in her church, but obviously no one paid her to do that. So she went to Viewmaster and she would do those clay figures. If you've ever seen those fantastic clay figure Viewmasters of Donald Duck and Tarzan and Cinderella and what have you. And they were so lovely, and Joe Mack was actually the guy that turned me onto them. I collected all of those, and then of course, you're a guy, so there's the Apollo moon landing. You've got to have that in 3D. And then there's 1950s Paris and London and whatnot. So you've got to have those because that's just cool. So then I remember I bought like the Wonder of the Fjords, and I was like, man, why the hell do I have the Wonder of the Fjords? And one of the most expensive Viewmasters is JFK Visits Ireland. And the reason why it's so expensive is because he visited Ireland in, like, let's say, I don't know the date he was assassinated, but he basically visited Ireland like 3 or 4 months before he was assassinated. So the thing came out for like no time at all, and then they had to pull it because obviously President was dead. So I had to have that one, and my wife and I, we were not happy together, so we bought like Hayward Wakefield furniture and just everything. And I realized that sometimes collecting isn't healthy. So I tried to rein it in, and what the things I did have, truly enjoyed them. I remember. This is back in the day. Everything is relevant to the time. But Akira, the fantastic series, they had the Japanese big phone book, black and white phone books, and they were fantastic. But I remember getting like 1, 2, 3, and 5. And as opposed to enjoying the first 3 while I looked for 4, I just cared about getting 4. And I was like, it was sort of a big, adjustment. I was like, what the hell am I doing? And I got rid of lots of stuff. And, when I got divorced and moved into Hollywood, and sort of changed my life somewhat. That's probably more personal than you. What's the next, anyone else?
Yeah, I have another question. Why do you think some superheroes are, some new superheroes are harder to adapt to screen or have more trouble getting adapted to screen than others? Like, for example, the Hulk until just recently in Joss Whedon's film, was pretty poorly put together, or not poorly, just it just didn't really translate. They didn't really translate well. And why do you think some heroes have a
Which
harder-
Hulk? Which Hulk?
Well, the Hulk that was depicted in the Avengers movie was pretty. Well, a lot of people felt it was more spot on in the previous film. And so I think it's why do you think some superheroes have an easier time than others being adapted?
Or Wonder Woman.
Or why has it Wonder Woman?
Yeah, Wonder Woman.
Well, I think that, there's a lot of reasons really, isn't there? I mean, I would have not necessarily, sometimes it's lightning in the bottle, Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. is so perfect as Tony Stark. And if he wasn't alive, it might be someone else that might not have been as good, But the people behind those Marvel movies are very smart. I mean, I think if we bring up the Hulk, the problem with the Hulk is he's just not that interesting. So he works. I mean, the best thing about the Hulk is when they brought in what's his name to play in the Avengers movie. I forget the actor's name. Mark Ruffalo. He's way more interesting than the Hulk. He's like I think everyone agreed. Would you all agree? He's like the second most fun character after Tony Stark.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? So, but when you have a whole movie, it's just not interesting. I don't know. I mean, these things. I didn't like the Superman movie because it missed too many marks. I don't actually care that much for the Batman movies. I think they're overwritten.
The new
but
one? The new Superman?
yes, the Man of Steel, the new one. But at least people get Batman because it's such an easy origin. His parents were killed, and he spent his whole life trying to avenge their death by tracking down criminals. It's so easy, and it's primal, so people get it. I'm amazed that Thor did as well as it did because it's just so complicated. Like, how do you, convey that? But it works. But it works, And sometimes less is more. I remember. I guess we've all seen these movies. So, Thor, when what's his name, Jeremy Renner, gets a bow and he doesn't say a word in the whole thing, and he's got the bow and he doesn't move. That is so cool. You can't wait to see this character. But when he's in the actual Avengers movie, he's kind of boring, So sometimes it's less is more. It's an interesting question, and if we were passing a joint back and forth at 2 in the morning at a party, we could probably talk. but it's anyone else? Yes.
So I'm actually not familiar with your work, but but you write your own characters as well as do superheroes, is that correct?
Well, I have written my own characters. I haven't for a while. But one of the things and I was sort of very much involved with DC Comics, and I've left that company. And even though I'm working at Marvel, I'm making a conscious decision to now go back to doing my own work again. So there's one book I'm writing for Image, and there's 2 more that are in the pipeline, and there's one at Dynamite. So I'm going back to write my own
My
characters.
question is pretty simple. I actually do writing for video games, and I've written for licensed characters.
Oh,
and I've
lucky
written
you.
for, sort of. But so to me, it's very different. I actually don't like the fact that video games are going in this direction of just licensed characters, because as the writer, I have so much more fun when I'm creating a character. Do you feel like you enjoy? How do you? Obviously you enjoy writing for the superheroes, but do you feel like you use a different part of your brain, or what? Are there advantages?
Well, again, I don't want to. I mean, I might do this horribly, and I'm being I'm deluding myself. But one of the things I feel I'm known for, I don't know if you guys agree, but is bringing a naturalistic element to the superheroes. I try and have them talk a bit more naturalistically. Sometimes people hate it because they're so used to a character talking in a certain kind of stiff way that if I had Donna Troy, I've just, she lost her kid, she went through all this horrible shit before I started writing her. And so I had to stop sort of swearing all the time, and it was deliberate. But people were like, oh my God, Donna Troy doesn't swear. But I try and bring this sort of humanity to these characters. I mean, obviously lots of writers do, I'm not the only one. So going from that to writing your own character, it really isn't that big a jump. If you have more of a formularized way that you write, Superman, and there are writers that are quite frankly quite boring in the way that they write dialogue. We don't have to name them. If they then wanted to bring a naturalistic element to a Predator book, maybe they would have a problem. I hope I do a good job, but it's always just been something I've tried to aspire to, even with superheroes. Cool.
I've noticed you've used the word humanity a lot in describing your own work. I apologize, I'm not familiar with the work as much, but I'm curious exactly how you define that term exactly, or at least within the confines of your own creation.
Well, I guess this is something, I don't know. Something I learned when I was first starting out, this first graphic novel in England was about to be published. When you are about to be published and you go to comic conventions, it is the most frustrating thing. The first time you're about to be published, it is so frustrating because you just want everyone to know what you're doing, and it's kind of you're invited to the party, but you can't have a drink at the punch bowl, So, but I remember Grant Morrison at the time, this was a Birmingham Comic Convention. He was very nice to me, and he, for no reason, didn't have to be. And he was talking about how a lot of writers are afraid to give of themselves and put their feelings into the characters, and that leaves a blank. And one of the things I tried to do with Jack Knight was really put myself into it to some degree. And I think that's humanity. It's like when you can see the person behind the costume. It's a lot of books, they're fun to read because the plots are fun, or the action's fun, or the art is nice. But at the end of it, you don't really feel a resonance coming from the character. And then you get someone like Brubaker or Alan Moore, whoever, where they can do that. So if I say humanity, I don't know if I always succeed, but at least that's what I aspire to do, is bring that sense of realism where you can feel the heart and soul of the character beneath the skin-tight leggings. Anyone else? So?
I have a question. When you're writing, or you sit and write, is there a particular person or a group of people you think of as audience, or is that intentional at all?
No, you just gotta. You can't write stuff that's so not repelling. That's what I'm trying to say. So distant from what people want to read, unless you want to push some buttons, I guess. But apart from kind of having a sense of a general sense of your audience, no, you should always write for yourself. I remember one guy took over a DC book, and he immediately went online. He was an author, a book author, and he went online and he said to someone, "Hey, I'm writing this book. What kind of stories do you want to read?" And it's like, that's the worst thing you could possibly do, So you have to write for yourself. So,
have you noticed any work patterns that you've developed over the years, or have you noticed any sort of creative tendencies towards your working style, like any given day or week?
Yeah. Excuse me, I've got the sniffles. That's why. It's just there are every comic book writer, when they've been in the industry as long as I have, can fall into lazy patterns, and I'm constantly catching myself. It's so easy when you're tired. You can knock out a page by doing lazy stuff and think about it and try to make it better. We all do it, and as I said before about constantly criticizing my own work, I think that has helped me to know. I mean, I've been in it for 20 years. Some guys are burnt out. There are guys, I could mention them, I don't even know if they're alive, they've left the industry. I'm still swinging, and I think possibly it's because I'm constantly editing myself and trying to improve on what I'm doing. And I haven't yet settled into that kind of complacency that I think you can have in anything really great.
All right, well, this last question. Yeah, right. Yeah, go for it. You have to take a picture of yourself.
That'd be great. Great question.
Crap, I hope I get this question right out of my head. You're just a writer, but do you ever have do you choose the artist, do you refuse an artist? Do you ever have a chance to like, just, make you're writing your work, but when it comes out, it's like, God, this art is terrible.
Well, that's what I said earlier about if you have an accord with your editor and your artist, then it won't come out terrible. It depends. It literally, like with Starman, I had such a great relationship with Archie that I really was with the Times Past, which I don't know if you've read the book, but the main book was for a long time drawn by this artist Tony Harris. But as a way to give it fill-ins, opposed to them being like disjointed stories, I had this formula where I would do these stories set in the past of the city. And with those, I literally would pick these guys and bring, Matt Smith, for instance, who's a guy doing Doctor Who now, but he'd never done a mainstream book, but Archie trusted him. That was one example. With the book I can't mention that I'm working on Marvel, me and the editor on this book, I've taken a long time to find what we believe to be the right artist. Sometimes, however, with deadlines, with production problems, stuff you don't even know, like the printers, this or that, things back up and then suddenly you get given this artist that is, awful, and then you can have these disappointing moments. So it really is a issue by issue, day by day basis, But if you find if you've worked with a guy in the past, you can really kind of control how the book looks. Like Fraction on Hawkeye, with David Aha, they did Iron Fist together, and so they already have this relationship, and I mean that's a spectacular book. So you can be in charge. You just doesn't always happen. Fantastic question.
Well, thank you for a fantastic talk.